Okay, so to continue with our investigation into color and how Photoshop can incorporate and use color, I wanted to do a more in-depth look at blend modes. Now, I've talked about these in the past a little bit, but I'm actually going to go through each. I won't go through every single blend mode, but I'll go through each of the main categories and kind of give a breakdown on what those do. And I have some sample images here just to show you these changes in real time. And before we can even see the layer, or sorry, the blend modes, we have to unlock our background. And then here's our blend mode options here, and this pops up. And if we just click here, we can see these are our blend modes. So just a quick breakdown of the different Photoshop blend modes here. We can see these different categories here, and Photoshop likes to break things down. You know, we can see that these kind of fit into 6 different categories here. The first one here is no blend mode. Nothing really happens here. You can change the opacity on the dissolve, and I'll show you what that looks like. But essentially, there's no blend mode here. Darken is this next group here, and this basically means that all of the whites will be affected or removed, right, to some or less degree. Lighten will be the next section here. The blacks, just the opposite. Blacks will be affected and removed. And then the next group is by contrast here. Now this will work by taking the middle values, and it will work with those. So typically these groups here, the overlay, soft light, hard light, this will work on affecting the contrast. The next set here, difference, exclusion, subtract, divide, this works by inversion. So Photoshop will look for differences between the base layer and the blend layer and make some adjustments accordingly, and I'll show you what that looks like. And the last section here, component, and this will only select a specific component of hue, saturation, color, or luminosity. And again, I'll show you what that looks like as well. Okay, so back to the image here. So the first two don't require a layer underneath to blend to. These two can just be applied onto the singular layer. And as we can see, there's no blend mode here. And here's where we could affect the opacity to make that layer itself more translucent, right? And then if we go to dissolve, we see nothing happens because we're at 100%, but if we scale this to the left, we can see that dither pattern coming through and that image dissolving into that static looking pattern there. Okay, so those two are pretty straightforward. For the other layers here, we will need another layer underneath, right? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to option click and drag down so I have 2 layers now. And the first group here, darken, essentially will darken your image here. The blend mode is going to remove or affect the whites to some, more or less to some degree here. So if we go to multiply, right, the whites are being affected, and we can turn this on or off, and we can see how that changes and gives a pretty drastic darkening to the overall image. And then the next grouping here, lighten, this will do the exact opposite. This will lighten the image to some degree, right? So if we go to screen, right, screen is doing the exact opposite. It's taking the blacks and giving us a much lighter range here. And again, we can turn that on and off. And you can play with these and see what's more appropriate. Again, some of these are used more than others. This last group here for contrast, this will affect the middle grays. And what this is doing, so if we go to overlay, for example, what overlay is doing is it's looking at the grays, right, where 50% gray is, and it's applying either a lightening or a darkening to those grays, so we get much more contrast. So the blacks and whites are left alone, but those grays are pushed in either direction. And here we can turn this on or off and see. And this makes for really nice contrast here. And if you're just curious to see where some of your colors are in terms of gray, right? If we just click on our eyedropper tool and let's just click on our color here. As I move this around, right, that 50% gray is this right here, this value B. So we have hue, saturation, brightness here. It's this B percentage. So 50% gray would be right here, right? Now remember, the hue could still be at 50% gray as well if we're talking about color. Or so here's 50% gray. So that's the value that Photoshop is looking at there. Okay, so the next ones get more interesting here. And I'm going to switch to a color image to kind of show these. So I'm going to unlock my background here so I can see the blend modes. So this group right here, inversion, so difference, exclusion, subtract, and divide. I don't actually use these too much, but I can show you what they do. So right now, so I need another layer. So I'm going to option click and drag. So now I have my two layers. So inversion is looking at the two images, and it's looking at differences. Okay, so it's looking at variations between the base and the blend layer, and then it will do things accordingly depending on what I pick. So if I pick difference, notice that it goes to black. That's because Photoshop doesn't see any difference between the pixels on my base layer and my blend layer. There's no difference at all, so it's black. But if I hit V in my move tool, and then if I move one of these images off slightly, now there's differences that are happening there. So Photoshop can see where those pixels look different, and then it will adjust that blend mode, right? Okay. And again, you can exclusion, subtract, and divide, right? We'll look for different things and adjust accordingly depending on where the differences are. The last one here, component. These can go hand in hand when you're doing color adjustments. So what this will do is that blend mode will only isolate that one particular thing. So hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. And let me show you what I mean here by this. So I'm going to, let me just set this to normal first. And let's say I can go into, let's say I go to black and white, right? And I'm on normal, and I'm making a really nice black and white image. And again, this is all non-destructive, so I can, you can always come back and make these changes. But let's just say I adjusted these to get a really nice black and white image. And what I can do here is, if I set my blend mode, let's say to luminosity, okay, the color comes back, right? The blend mode is on this adjustment layer, so the color comes back, and now I can adjust the luminance on each of these colors, right? So I'm not affecting the hue, I'm just affecting that brightness of each one of these colors. So this is where, right, the last set, the component one, this can give you a bit more control with your color adjustments by just isolating the one aspect you're looking for. So hue, saturation, color, luminosity. Okay? So those are the various blend modes. Again, explore those and play around with those in these assignments and see how the different blend modes can affect your work. And we will stop there.